All right, let's go ahead and get started this afternoon. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us today again at NCMA Midyear. This is our market segment session, and we're going to be discussing Masonry and future initiatives. My name is Gary Hensley, and for those that this may be your first time joining one of the committee meetings, I want you to make sure and submit questions. And as you will see going through here, and as you haven't already previous sessions, if you've joined any, that the hard work at the NCMA puts forth for our industry. And right now, before we get started with the future initiatives, I want to let's hear a word from one of our sponsors to get this started. And then we'll have a few housekeeping items to review. So let's hear from our sponsors. Once again, we want to thank our sponsors at Hess at this time, with Hess Equipment, tremendous company. So please, we'll say more about the sponsors in a moment. So thank them for that. Want to, first of all, you've probably heard this little intro 2 or 3 times already, but for those that may not have, we want to make sure and give them the benefit of the doubt. We are using in this Midyear platform the Adobe Connect, and in order to provide the best technology for each unique session. In this session, we will be using the Adobe Connect platform. All attendees will be muted upon entry. Attendees may participate in this session by using the Q&A box, and I strongly encourage you to do so. Also, if you have any trouble connecting or technical issues, we have one of the best in Randy Hertzberg, and feel free to jot her cell number down, 443-996-0783, should you have any questions, or Hertzberg at ncma.org. Also want to inform you that the session is being recorded, and by participating in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. Another one we need to go is to remind ourselves that we are operating under the NCMA's antitrust policy, which can be found on the NCMA Midyear event website. All participants are expected to exhibit professional behavior in compliance with this policy, as well as NCMA's anti-harassment policy. As noted on this slide, please refrain, intervene, or disengage from inappropriate discussions and report any concerns directly to the NCMA staff person. Now, as we said about Hess, as you can see here in this slide, we want to make sure and thank our very generous and very engaged sponsors for their support of this event. Whether it's in person or whether it's virtually, they have proved to be great supporters of our industry. And please visit the NCMA Midyear event website to meet all of our event sponsors. To give you just a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at today, first we're going to be looking at the strategic plan review and 2021 work plan. review of the process and the outcome of the strategic planning, and they'll cover the details of what is and is not in the new Masonry Market Strategic Plan. Then we're going to hear from Joyce Owens on why I use masonry. Joyce is a masonry-friendly architect and tells us why she loves designing with concrete masonry. It's so flexible and CMU, and it's very easy material to work with. As an architect that builds many different type buildings, it's a nice material to use for creating new ideas because it is so flexible. And you'll be able to read more about Joyce's interview with NCMA. And then we're going to have an open forum where we can exchange some questions and submit questions among members, and where they make questions and or comments. Now, we're going to jump right into the strategic plan review, and we're going to hear from Nick Lane. And for those of you who may not have joined us and don't know Nick, Nick is the VP of Business Development and has been with the association since 2006. He leads the education and resource development of the association. He has managed the NCMA laboratory and is very involved in the ACM standard development. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Pittsburgh and is registered engineer in Maryland. Nick, let's hear about our strategic plan.
All right, thank you very much, Gary. Excited to share some of this stuff with you guys. It's an area that all of our market segment committees in the masonry market in particular have been doing a lot of work on over the past couple of months. It's really, a good overview of what the future, what the future initiatives and what the future goals are of the masonry market segment. So to get started, both NCMA and the masonry market segment have strategic plans. NCMA's is a 3-year plan, and it technically concludes at the end of 2020. It was in place from 2018 to 2020. For masonry, really the last time the strategic plan was updated was way back in 2015. And so this is really prime time for critical review and development of new plans to help guide us into the future. In terms of looking at these different strategic plans, really the association's goals are and frankly should be relatively static and high level because they're supporting a lot of different things that we have going on. For market segments, however, the thinking is that they should be more focused, granular, and detailed, really to specifically identify initiatives, projects, and things that can really move each of these market segments forward and to achieve the goals of the industry. So since NCMA's convention, the committee's been working to develop these strategic plans. A couple important things off the bat. Number one is, and probably the most important, is that these plans are still completely draft. They've been shared within the different masonry committee and subcommittees for review and feedback. We received a lot of during some of the conference calls leading up to our mid-year event here. But everything that I'm going to show today are things that the committees are still working. So any comments you have would be great to hear through the Q&A box right now, or otherwise you can share them with staff or masonry committee members later on. But hopefully these will be finalized toward the end of this year. But again, everything's still draft right now. The plans identify core focus areas for industry investment. Something that gets a little bit more granular, which we won't cover in a ton of detail here today, but there are a variety of tiered implementation levels for different projects, and that allows the committee and the industry to identify where kind of increased investment might be worthwhile. Each project that I'm going to give you a high-level summary of really has a detailed plan with tasks and quarterly benchmarks that will help the committee stay on track. And finally, this plan is intended to be a living document. The Masonry Committee will be regularly monitoring programs and tasks like they always do, and going to need to make adjustments as necessary based on project progress, evolving market needs, that sort of thing. So certainly it's something that we will continue to use to help guide the activities of our Masonry market segment over the next several years. Now, as we look to putting these programs together, we sort of took as one of our first guiding principles, building on the quote of a goal without a plan is just a wish. And so if we don't have plans, the things that we want to get done or the goals we want to get done are little more than wishes. So we have feedback and input from the membership, and we synthesize that into a draft strategic work plan to help guide NCMA's efforts over the next several years. In refining the details of the plan, we kind of looked at it from a singular objective as a primary goal for the entire market segment, which is that our collective goal is to increase sales and grow market share. Simply put, those are that's kind of the highest level goal relative to what the Masonry market segment is trying to do. As such, assessments within the plan, both for new and existing programs, critically review what programs are out there through that lens of meeting the goal. In some cases, there are recommendations to kind of cancel programs, and in other places to identify new programs to fill gaps that may exist within the collective plan. So this work plan is organized to provide a high-level overview and initiatives as well as more detailed discussion of major projects. It is organized by assigning each of our initiatives, both new and existing, into one of the 4 different categories you see on the screen. On the top left is resources and implementation. These include activities such as research, software development, and building codes advocacy. Next on the top right is education and outreach. These include activities related to promotional efforts and targeted education of industry personnel, designers, and decision makers. Bottom right is workforce development, partnership, robust installer workforce. And on the bottom left, which is market share, is to help support, measure, and influence decisions. NCMA is investigating the role of members' products in the construction industry through various analyses. So now I'm going to step through kind of each of these at a next level down to give you an idea of what types of projects are included within each of these focus areas. So the first one is education and outreach. And within this category are projects that are related to promotional efforts and targeted education of industry personnel, designers, and decision makers. The projects that are included within this segment of the plan include online education, which is on-demand virtual education. In addition, both for general market drivers as well as the issues we have relative to COVID-19, the plan includes transitioning the in-person courses that NCMA has, such as our basic block and hardscape sales course, online rather than trying to host those in person over at least the next year or 2. We also have seminars and webinars that are either in-person or web-based training that is targeting designers and the industry. These seminars and webinars could either be hosted by NCMA directly or sponsored by regional promotion groups, individual producers, or other third parties. We also have our university student design labs and our unit design competition. These are generally NCMA foundations, raising interest and awareness in students relative to concrete masonry. I would say that for both of these is that some of the activities in some of these areas have waned over the past several years, and so the program includes some focus on trying to reinvigorate them and putting in place some benchmarks for ensuring future success. The next one we have is architect education. We really are leaning on the AEC Daily platform for doing a lot of that, and so the program within the strategic work plan includes development and posting of educational content targeting architects on that AEC Daily external platform. We also have our technical inquiry response. This is team can get free beneficial feedback and answers to questions related to member products. We get calls from members, we get calls from designers, we get calls from others, and it's something that we maintain as a service to the industry. Industry liaison is another one, which include our outreach efforts to engage and educate national and regional partners to help direct NCMA's efforts. We also have a project outline with you guys, the members. Includes our e-news, social media efforts, annual report, email blasts, and all sorts of other related activities to inform and engage the membership. And then finally, we have promotion, and promotion is really are direct advertising and related promotional efforts targeting users and decision makers. This includes targeting a variety of products and services that NCMA offers. Now, within the education and outreach market segment, or not market segment, I'm sorry, category, there were some gaps that were identified, and a couple new initiatives to fill those gaps are proposed. One of them is designer and university outreach. It's an area where we maybe need to have need to focus a little bit differently. And so really this is targeting creation of a central repository of masonry design, construction, and educational resources for virtual delivery. Targeted audiences would include designers. Most importantly is that it ministers primarily to help get things up and running, and then also content relative to concrete masonry. Then the second one is enhanced online education. So recent events, such as the pandemic, have accelerated the transition to online delivery for a lot of our programs. And this program for enhanced online education would add new components and content to NCMA's existing online education platform that is targeting industry personnel. All right, so the next broad category is resources and implementation. And so projects within this category are those such as resource development and maintenance, and code advocacy. The projects in this category include digital technology platforms. This includes development and improvements with NCMA's software solutions, such as the direct design software and the upcoming Ella Masonry software we heard about yesterday, as well as supporting efforts to get masonry into BIM platforms through 3D-IQ and otherwise, and other related support mechanisms targeting users. This also includes our tech digital upgrades, which includes consolidation and repackaging of NCMA's published literature into digital-friendly platforms to facilitate electronic access and distribution. This also includes maintenance and updating of all NCMA's other technical resources, such as FAQs and longer guides. Next up is our product category rule, updating our existing product category rule, or PCR, to capture changes in reporting requirements and market drivers. We also have a project on urban infill construction models. This is a foundation-funded project that's currently going on with Syracuse University to help develop models for residential construction using CMU, especially targeting some of the both urban infill as well as projects that might be funded through, say, Habitat for Humanity. And then we have a wide variety of structural research included in the work plan. And these are ongoing and future investigations into the performance of concrete masonry. Some of the things we currently have going on include lightweight grout, prism aspect ratio factors, boundary elements, maximum and dry stack masonry construction. A large focus area in the future is carbon sequestration, and this is looking at establishing testing protocols for measuring and reporting the carbon dioxide uptake of manufactured concrete products, and then incorporating that into a lot of our industry recommendations, education, and promotion efforts. Another project is our energy calculator, which is utilizing available energy modeling research to develop promotional energy resources, and potentially in the future an online calculator that can be used by decision makers. One thing you heard about yesterday was fire safety recalibration, and this includes research to investigate alternatives to the existing equivalent thickness method for calculating fire-resistant concrete construction. It's going to use existing new fire research data, develop alternative design paths, and code-compliant fire-resistant design. And finally, our global efforts relative to codes and standards to advocate for the industry and influence codes and standards that impact the use and application of member products. Also, some gaps were additionally identified, and there are projects to help fill those gaps, one of which is an EPD calculator. This calculator would be really developing an online database to facilitate members' developments of EPDs for manufactured concrete products. A new project to research alternative means of providing reinforcement for crack control, concrete masonry veneer. This would be a application project. Developing an online interactive series of videos that is a composite form a digital textbook for university curriculum. Next one would be digital TMS 402. So TMS 402 and 602 is the building code requirements and specification for masonry structures. And this would help to create an online digital platform that provides a centralized hub for accessing design resources and information through the TMS 402, 602 standards. And then next up is our high-growth thermal moisture analysis. Again, this is another foundation-funded project that would be a research investigation to conduct dew point analyses on a wide variety of concrete masonry assemblies in climate zones that are out there in North America. And then finally, a best practices CMU specification, which is developing a generic concrete masonry specification that incorporates not only minimum building code requirements, but also our industry recommendations and best practice. So that covers resources and implementation. Next up is workforce development. Now, relative to workforce development for concrete masonry, we know we have a lot of partners out there, such as the Mason Contractors Association of America, the International Masonry Institute, and so a lot of the efforts that we have going on within workforce development are really helping to support those partners in their efforts they have to grow the workforce of Masons. Some of the projects include online training curriculum, conversion of classroom components for the training program for Masons into a digital platform for broader access, and also supporting the Skills USA national competition, which is held annually in partnership with other national masonry stakeholders. Now, there are some gaps that are identified and some new initiatives that are kind of being proposed to help fill those gaps. First one is workforce recruitment and retention survey. This includes conducting surveys and interviews to practices and employee satisfaction, trying to find the best ways to help both recruit and retain qualified installer workforce, and a workforce summit that would convene stakeholders for a multi-day summit and needs analysis of the masonry workforce. And then finally, that takes us to our fourth category, which is market share. And for this one, it's efforts really to support, measure, and influence informed decisions, NCMA's role in investigating members' products usage in the construction industry through various market share. And the only real project we have going on within this particular, within this particular segment is our annual sales survey. This is an annual survey of concrete masonry producers to track sales volume and product type across all 6 NCMA regions. This is one step in the process of trying to determine market share. It looks at the overall change in sales of concrete masonry products over the course of of an annual basis. However, it doesn't really look at the relative percentage of market share within within the construction industry. Now, that is an identified gap within here as market share. And so, however, it's a tricky thing to figure out, and so it would really require some increased investment in this area, which isn't currently being proposed, but could be future. So to kind of summarize, what you see on the screen here are really what we would kind of call our market segment. And that includes online education, designer education, digital technology development, and then a variety of research areas that will really help move the industry forward. So, as I said before, the Masonry Committee and subcommittees are reviewing this plan and providing feedback. We're working on developing a final draft for consideration, and hopefully it'll be something that we continue to work through and you guys continue to help us in the future. Now, one thing that's a little bit unique to the Masonry plan as well is really development of what we're calling the wish list. And so, as we all know, there's there was always the potential for increased investment in trying to move our industry forward. One way of such investment could potentially be the heard about there in the town hall yesterday. And so we try to create things that maybe don't fit within the available resources of the industry for right now, but could be areas where we could invest in the future. And so those wish lists include things like helping to support better regional coalitions for flipping projects, design assistance programs, design awards, national promotion, market share. We just talked about currently within our plan, but are areas that we can invest in the future. And so with that kind of brings me to the end of covering kind of at a high level the details of the current draft of the strategic plan. We're anticipating that this will hopefully be finalized later on this year, and will provide the roadmap for the masonry market segment next year. So we'll conclude and turn things, Gary, back over to you. I would say if anybody has any comments or thoughts on it, please add them to the Q&A, and we'll discuss those during our open forum a little bit later on.
Thank you, Nick. As everyone can see, Nick and the staff there at NCMA stays very focused and busy on carrying out these strategic projects that we have and the plan that's been discussed among committee. Another reason I would encourage, if you're not a member of the NCMA, to please participate in this. We gather information from all sectors of the industry, and they stay very focused on what Nick said from the very beginning, to increase our sales and growth in market share. So that's all of our objectives and goals. And if everyone understood masonry as good as our next speaker, we wouldn't have to measure market share. We'd just take it over. So hopefully you will enjoy our next speaker, as I know you will. Her name is Joyce Owens, and she is the principal architect at Architecture Joyce Owens, LLC, Studio AJO. She oversees all of the design work that comes out of the office and meets with current and potential clients to explore creative possibilities and solutions. She and her team are dedicated to innovation, collaboration, debate, and cooperative experience with all her clients. Her client list extends to the United States, United Kingdom, and Italy. Her work has won many awards and been featured in many well-known media sources. So please, with us, make welcome Joyce Owens.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. What an honor to be here with you guys today, and what a great presentation that Nick gave me personally about going through your strategic plan. That was really eye-opening to me, and to see what you guys are doing and where you're headed. And hopefully you can see by my first slide here, it says my architecture and our future. And that means I'd like to talk about my work and how masonry has influenced my own work, and then maybe our future together, and perhaps how we can alter your strategic plan, maybe just a little bit. So if I could get started, I want to start with a question. How does a nice Florida girl like me end up here at the NCMA today at your National Concrete Masonry Association convention here in 2020? Maybe you've seen me before. I have been covered. They did a nice interview with me earlier this year, and there's a kind of a good story here about who I am and what I do, and so I'd like to cover some of those things now that I have you face to face. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, I'm having a little technical difficulty here. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I started my career in Florida, and at the time I was building mostly with wood for residential work when I was first here. I live on the west coast of Florida, so that was quite normal for us to be using wood for residential. We were using masonry for commercial work, but certainly not for residential. And this is on the island, which was interesting. And And then I made a decision to go study, work abroad, and I ended up getting my license in Britain as well as having my own business in Britain. And so over the years, I've been in 2 countries, I have 2 licenses, and I have had 2 different practices, of which I still have the 1 practice in Florida now. So very interesting, like my time in the UK was spent in London. I really began to understand about building when I lived in London, I think more so than I understood in Florida. I began working with brick and working on older buildings at that time. It really is a harsh climate there, very wet and damp all the time, not sunny like Florida, so it never dries out. So the buildings there are built for durability. And it was interesting to look at historical buildings and to understand how they build for longevity. And masonry was very much a part of that. And then I had the opportunity, having my own practice, to begin to experiment a bit. And so we began in our business to experiment with concrete and using concrete in some of the historic buildings in Britain. And then we started to build new. As we got better seasoned in what we were doing, we started to build new projects. And we actually began to use in situ concrete or poured in place concrete. So these are just some photographs of one particular project, which we call the Concrete Oasis, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but quite beautiful at the same time, where we were able to, I guess in a way sort of play with concrete and see how this material actually worked in Britain. But you can see on the inside, even though we exposed the concrete on the outside, and in some places on the inside, it really made for a beautiful building there. So that was my time in London, and then I made the decision to move back to the U.S. permanently. So I've been back for nearly 15 years, and again, I started my own practice here now, and I was shocked, though, when I came back to Florida and the Sunshine State, because I felt that a lot of things had been lost during those 15 years while I was away. I felt there was a lack of direction in the design and in the building techniques that were being this was sort of before the big hurricanes that were started to come through, one 1992 and then again in 2004, when all of a sudden architecture and building didn't really have a purpose anymore. And so I felt what I was coming back to was sort of, I called it applique architecture. It was like people were just sticking things on buildings and there wasn't any reason for them anymore. And I felt like in Florida that they were building not for the climate, but just for profit. And again, a lot of these buildings were painted beige, it seemed like. So I don't know, I was uncomfortable. So I wanted to do something about it. So I felt maybe I could come up with a plan of action. So for me personally, since I'd made the decision to move to live in Florida, like how could I change that? I was really kind of interested. So I decided that I'd learn a lot about old Florida buildings so that I could look backwards in order to look forward and understand how we needed to build for the future and how we could create for this place. Just like I had learned to build appropriately when I lived in London. So I look back, there's first the Florida Cracker buildings, the older buildings made of wood, the cheeky huts that the Seminole Indians would put together out of thatch. And then and interestingly, the Spanish Revival of the 1920s, which was pretty much all built out of masonry units at that time. And those buildings are still in very good condition here and very well taken care of. I also fell in love with a lot of the mid-century architecture of Florida. And very interesting, a lot of these buildings were, masonry was definitely used in these buildings. And I love how the masonry is used here because It's innovative and it's interesting. It's a lot more fun. And so I focused on mid-century Florida architecture as my sort of guide to how I wanted to go forward in my own business. So in commercial buildings, again, we use a lot of masonry units here. And what I love about it is the flexibility that it allows me to have. There's so many different ways you can use masonry down here. So it's not new to use masonry in Florida, but what I think we're all learning is that is how flexible it can be when you're designing for your climate. And so here you see I'm trying to design for my climate with lots of shade and big overhangs to protect us from the sun and the rain, because what we need to take care of here is get out of the sun and get out of the rain. So again, you can see all sorts of masonry units being used here, including some masonry unit concrete benches personally designed by me. They're my own masonry units. I'm also building, I'm designing a lot of houses on the beach now. And as opposed to when I used to live in Florida and was working here and building out of timber, because of the hurricanes and the flooding, we're learning, and I've really been experimenting a lot with CMU in my design, is that working in concrete is so much better than working in wood. And I can tell you, these buildings, duration, they're going to be looking at these houses that we're now building on the beach, 500 years from now as relics, because they're incredible the way we no longer do we use wood pilings anymore, but we're driving our pilings into the ground, and then we're using grade beams. We're building up on top of those with masonry units before we get to the ground floor. And that ground floor to us is our flood zone. We're in FEMA zones here. And so we have to be, 12, 13, 14, 15 feet above grade. And so the ground floor, it was like building a city under the ground before we even get to the first floor, which is just for storage and garage. And then we build up, and we're using concrete planks at the first floor living level, and then masonry units on top of that. And sometimes we're using trusses, wood trusses for the roof, and sometimes we're using planks again. So these buildings are really, really meant to last. And it's been a great education for me, and a very interesting opportunity that my company has a great reputation for actually building some of the best, most resilient houses out on the beaches now. So sometimes we even use masonry when we want to pretend we're building out of wood. So if a client comes to me and says, I want a wood framed house, we won't do that for them anymore. We insist on building out of masonry so that the buildings will last and they won't rot. Because masonry, not only is it great for hurricanes and for flooding, but also for this climate, which is very humid and very wet. Here's another house that's on the beach, which is built out of masonry. And you can see the flexibility. There's no kind of design restrictions when you're working with masonry. And it gives us a lot of flexibility. Here's the inside. Again, all masonry on the inside as well as the outside. So here I am back in Florida, and I'm living the dream. I'm building on the beach. I mean, what more could anybody want? But I don't think I've answered the question yet. How does a Florida girl end up at the NCMA? So as part of my research in trying to understand who I could be in Florida and how I could build, I got very involved with the American Institute of Architects, the AIA. Initially, I got involved at a local level, and then quickly moved up to state president in 2017. And what I found through the AIA was it gave me not only the opportunity to meet, colleagues, for the fellowship of meeting other architects and understand how they had been building for all the years that I was away in England. But it also gave me a platform to speak about how we need to be building for our climate wherever we are, whether we're in Florida or California or Michigan or New York. I mean, we each needed to think locally about what works in our climate. And so after being the state president, I'm now at a national level, and I am currently a member of the Strategic Council. And I am also a member of the Public Outreach Committee as well at a national level. So the Strategic Council is really the think tank of the American Institute of Architects. And by that, what I mean is we're sort of out there in the public, out in the community, and we're trying to understand where our profession needs to go. What are the opportunities and what are the threats? And what are the things that the Institute needs to be doing? So we're not the board, where the board is sort of leading the Institute. We're behind the board, and we're presenting ideas to the board and to other branches of the AIA. So it's a great opportunity for me to be in this position because it means I get to travel, I get to see, or before the COVID, I was able to see, other places and what other communities are doing as far as how they're building and what they're working on. So I'm just going to go through some of the kind of topics that we focus on as the Strategic Council. Importantly for us is equity and diversity. And this is not something new for the AIA. We've been working on this very intensely for the past 5 years on working on how do we change our profession from being a profession of old white men to being a profession of women and people of color and all kinds of people, and how do we make it possible for all of us to share in the profession? And we're all gonna work differently, and so how can the AIA help us to work differently and to work together and very collaboratively? Big data is a huge issue with us. I saw that Nick had mentioned it earlier when you guys were talking, when he was talking to you about your strategic plan is a huge issue for us. And interestingly, there's so many things that it's about, but one of the things that's relevant to you and us is that we're trying to understand the materials. And through the use of BIM models and data collection, we can understand how materials are used from start to finish. And then what are the benefits of these materials? How are building methods, how do they affect the maintenance of the buildings, and long-term costs, so as well as early costs that are involved with the materials that we use. So it's really trying to understand the lifetime of a building. So big data has become really important in our association. And then the third thing that I want to cover today that we're really focused on is climate action. The AIA has been a big component. We've been looking at climate action for a long time. We've had a commitment to sustainable design and resilient design for decades. And so, but that we want to take a bigger stand in our climate action. And so what we've done in the past was we had put out in 2006 an architectural challenge called the Architecture 2030 Challenge. And our goal was to create net zero buildings by 2030. When we did this in 2006, a lot of organizations jumped on board with us. And it was really important for us to concentrate on doing our 2030 challenge. And a lot of firms got on board, a lot of architects got on board, a lot of these other associations were supporting us. But we also did a lot of other things in the American Institute of Architects. And so it wasn't our only focus. And so over the years, it became a little bit diluted, I suppose. So in the last couple of years, we decided that 2020, we would make a huge renewed effort that would augment the 2030 commitment that we had made in 2006. So everything that the big move to us meant everything that we were doing within the Institute was going to be viewed through the lens of climate change and climate action. So every single program that we were doing, every bit of money we were spending, each time we reached out to members and how we spoke to the community as well would be viewed through the lens of climate action. So it's not that we don't do everything else, it's as if we just shifted our action towards the environment instead. So I guess how are we going to do this was the question that we all asked. And one of the big ones would be through education of the architects and the community about how can we immediately reduce carbon in communities? How could we look at passive design of our buildings again? How could we look at energy efficient measures when we're designing new buildings? And how we can convince the community that adapting existing buildings can be just as important as building new buildings. And it doesn't mean that you only have to, keep the existing building as it is. It might be changing that building and adding on to existing buildings instead of, discarding those buildings that we built many years ago. So as architects, of course, we have to give ourselves framework to work within because that's sort of how our minds and our brains operate. So in order to design these high-performing, equitable, and beautiful buildings, we created 10 points that we would use to design all buildings, whether big or small, and also as a way to communicate to our clients and to our allies in the construction industry. So they're very simple 10 points that we're using here. We want to consider how do we design to ensure that we save water? How do we design so that it makes sense in the economy that we're building in? How do we address energy issues when designing buildings? Oops, I've done it again. Can I get back on my slide?
Hi, Joyce. I think Kayla's working on getting that up for you right now.
Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so that was the first three that I talked about. Then designing for integration. So that means kind of looking at the community that we're building in or the site that we're building on, and then designing for the community. So actually addressing the particular community that we're within, whether that be a poor community or a wealthy community, an industrial site, so on, that we think about these. And then designing for the ecology, which means not only the land that we're building on, but also addressing the kind of biodiversity of the other people that are other inhabitants of the earth, animals and plants and so on. So, and very importantly right now is designing for wellness, which I think is going to change a lot after our recent pandemic issues. Designing buildings that will create healthy environments. Then design for our resources, using resources that are local and appropriate, So we're not trying to transport, stone across the world, just use stone that we have locally. Designing for change, again, a really important point after the pandemic. How are buildings going to be used in the future, and how do we design buildings that are flexible, so that now that we know we can work from home, and we don't need buildings the same way we did before. So what's going to happen to those buildings? So going forward, we're going to have to think about, like, how can these buildings become much more flexible, both existing buildings and the new buildings that we're doing. And finally, designing for discovery is just a sort of way for us to express that we want our buildings to be, they should be more than just functional buildings. They should be delightful, and they should be fun, and we should enjoy the time that we spend in our buildings. So very importantly to this group is our concentration on using low-impact building materials. And I think I really want to reach out to you and speak to you about this particular aspect of the architects trying to move forward towards environmental stewardship. We have a program at the AIA called Material Matters, and it's a partnership between the AIA and building product manufacturers like the NCMA. And we try to work together on a number of different levels so that we can work with you to, tell you, like I am doing now, about where we're headed, so that your products can be built to meet the requirements that we're going to be looking for in the future, as well as, give us the opportunity to see what you're doing as well. We have a very good program in Florida with our Masonry Association, where our association and the architects are very close. We socialize together. We go to their manufacturing plants, and we really do get to know who the players are and who the people are and how we can work together. So I feel that the big move with the AIA is really about creating the partnerships with you, because architects love CMU and we want to use it. We really want to use CMU in the building that we design, but we're going to demand that CMU become a low-impact building material so we can reach our carbon zero goals that we've set for ourselves. And we all know that masonry units aren't the best in that instance, but I know, I was listening in earlier this week, we were doing a dry run through our presentations, and I'm learning that you, as an organization, are working on this now, but I'm here to sort of encourage you to do that on a higher level than you felt maybe you should be in the past. It was quite interesting listening to Nick talk about the strategic plan and how he said it wasn't finished yet. So I would like to encourage you to really insert this effort to become a low-impact building material into your strategic plan, so that your manufacturing can become less impactful on the environment, because architects are going to want to use that. And we want to have this dialogue with you, and we want to work with you. So it's great. I think that your goal in the strategic plan is to increase sales. And so what better way to increase sales but to make your product more desirable for the architect? We're here, we're ready, and we want to use it. So I challenge you, let's try to work together, because I love using the best material I can find, and I would like masonry to be one of the most sustainable and resilient products, because it does work for us, and I encourage you to do that. So with that challenge, I'm going to open it up for Q&A, and I'm going to ask you, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Joyce. As Gary's getting set up here, we did get several questions that came in through the chat box, and I wanted to see if you could address some of them.
Okay.
The first one actually came from a couple people. Is do you or AIA do you have ways to define what a low impact material is, or how is that being addressed in terms of metrics or criteria?
No, I don't think it's a specific metric that we have. I think it's part of a long-term goal. And so, when we talk about things, I mean, you mentioned it too in your strategic plan about looking at, energy calculation and carbon sequestration. I thought that was quite interesting because those are all things that can be used by architects to create buildings that are moving towards the goal of being net zero. So not yet do we have these kind of things, but this is what a great, right there. There's a goal that we can try to achieve together. How can we create those metrics together so that we can use your product more?
Great, appreciate that. So another question came in. Do you have any feel for your clients and how knowledgeable they are about resilient buildings, or are they not as knowledgeable relative to what's resilient and not resilient?
I can speak generally on that term, and I would say for the most part our clients are very uneducated at the moment, and that's a huge goal within our industry, especially because I'm both on strategic council and the public outreach. Those are the goals that we're trying to achieve in the next couple of years, is how do we educate the architects so that we're able to speak fluently and with authority about why it's important to build resiliently in the future, and also how it doesn't always cost more money to build this way. What are the alternatives to building differently than we have in the past? So we're very much working on that program now.
Okay, thank you. Another one is, does AIA have any definition or creation between sustainable design or resilient design?
No. No, I think they're one and the same thing. So we have very much outlined what those things mean in those 10 points that I had shared with you. There's a lot more information about what exactly the definitions of what those are, and they both point towards both resiliency and sustainability. They're encompassing both at the same time. We don't see them as independent.
Okay, thank you.
But I must say, can I say one thing?
Sorry.
When I speak about resiliency, though, I do have to say, there is also always a local resiliency that we have to address. And so while we don't separate them, they are specific to areas. So the way I build in Florida and design in Florida is very different to how you would design in the Midwest or up in New York where there's a lot of snow. So it's, in that sense, it's very different. I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. No. So maybe one more question. I know there's a couple more, and we can certainly work with, getting responses from Joyce another time. I know we're sort of running late on time, but the wood industry has been, doing a lot about marketing their product as, sustainable and even carbon negative.
Oh, I've lost you, Nick.
On, some of those. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, say it again.
Am I back yet?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
So the wood industry, Nick, I think if you be real still, you and I have a tendency to move around. I think it won't break up, hopefully.
All right, I'll try not to move at all. So the wood industry has been, effective at marketing wood as sustainable, in a lot of cases carbon negative, which from our perspective, there's a lot of sort of holes in some of those arguments. But do you have any thoughts from an architect's perspective on wood and some of their sustainability claims?
I don't specifically have on their claims. I think wood can be a very sustainable product, and I think they're doing a great job of marketing it. And I hope that the Masonry Association will take note of that and begin to see that they don't want to be taken over by wood, because wood, while it can be sustainable, it isn't great in every climate. And so it's not great in my climate. And so I'm learning that while it's very flexible, it doesn't have the longevity of masonry. So as often as I can, I'm trying to build in masonry just so that, there's a value in hiring an architect, not only from the value of a good design, but in designing a building that's going to last, for a much longer time. And so I try to avoid using wood for that reason in my climate. But I'd pay attention to what the wood industry is doing, because they're trying, and I want the Masonry Unit Association to be, out there too, doing the same thing.
That's great. That's great. Joyce, very, very much appreciate all your time and your insights. And Gary, I think I'll turn it over to you. We're probably a couple minutes over, but I think we had a lot of good discussion here.
Yeah, Joyce, we certainly appreciate someone using facts and logic and design qualities to look at buildings. And to hear you say working in concrete is so much better than working in wood. Like I said in the beginning, you're a lady after our own heart. So
yeah.
It is. It's getting that message out, and thanking you for your insight and challenge to our industry to get that message out. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
Again, we want to say thanks to everyone that's joining us. We had a great group on here today of participants. And again, visit the website to take a look at our sponsors' commercials and all the insights for their supporting us. And please complete the poll before you leave the session. The feedback is very important to make sure that we present our presentations better each and every time. And remember, coming up, market segment session, SRWs and Hardscape Future Initiative from 2 till 3, and then the family business and small business from 2 till 3:45, and networking hour, the beer tour and eHappy, 7 to 8 p.m. and 8 to 9 p.m. I do encourage you, if you do participate in that virtually, have a virtual driver getting home. All right. And again, we appreciate so much your participation today. And
hey, Gary.
So don't. Yes,
hey,
sir.
Hey, Gary. One quick comment we've been getting questions on. For the beer tour, I know there was a registration required in order to get some of the beers delivered to you. If you didn't do that and you still wanted to come and join to hear about things and have a bit of social time, everyone is still invited to attend that session, even if you didn't sign up ahead of time. So please feel free to participate as much as you would like.
All right, Nick, thank you very much. And again, thanks to everyone that joined us today and all our speakers. Have a great afternoon and evening.